In the past couple of years, there's been some suggestion, including it should be said from us, that the EU could be moving towards what we might call a two-speed Europe, with some sort of half membership available to states on the EU's periphery. This idea has a long history. German policymakers were talking about the creation of a core Europe as early as 1989, but it's resurfaced in recent months as a potential way of accelerating Ukraine's accession in the wake of any peace deal. However, while a two-speed EU might still be the direction of travel in the medium term, in the more immediate future, a multi-speed EU seems to be coming into view, as frustrated subsets of member states forge ahead with their own efforts at integration. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how these new groups, including the recently coined E6, are ploughing on with things, and whether this staggered approach to integration ultimately helps or hinders the European vision of an ever closer union. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. We first got a sense that things might be headed in this direction back in December, when the EU held a summit to figure out how it was going to fund Ukraine's war effort in the wake of withdrawal of US aid. As you might remember, the original plan was to use the 210 billion euros or so of frozen Russian assets held in Europe, the vast majority of which are currently held in Belgium in a depository called Euroclear, either by just seizing them outright or by using them as collateral to fund a zero-interest loan to Ukraine. This plan ultimately fell through, largely because Belgium was worried about the risk of legal retaliation from Russia after the war, and other member states were unwilling to offer sufficient guarantees to placate these concerns. The only other realistic option to fund Ukraine then was to issue joint debt. That is, debt issued by the European Union itself, rather than by member states, which currently lack the fiscal space to fund Ukraine's war effort. Unfortunately, this was also problematic, because issuing joint debt was generally taken to require unanimity among member states, and a handful of EU countries, namely Hungary, Czechia and Slovakia, had signalled that they would veto any attempt to issue joint debt for Ukraine. The other member states were unable to convince these three to withdraw their vetoes. So, with the clock running out and Ukraine in dire need, the other 24 member states decided that getting this done was more important than respecting the usual norms, and essentially circumvented the unanimity requirement using what's known as an enhanced cooperation procedure. For context, the Enhanced Cooperation Procedure is a legal instrument that allows a smaller group within the EU, comprising of a minimum of 9 member states, to establish advanced integration in a policy area that falls within EU competence, but without the other member states being involved. In other words, it allows more ambitious groupings of member states to forge ahead with intra-European integration, if and when they feel like the rest of the EU is holding them back. In practice, this means that the debt will be issued by the EU, but Hungary, Czechia and Slovakia will have no role in paying it off. Anyway, this decision raised a fair few eyebrows. Since their creation in 1997 via the Treaty of Amsterdam, these enhanced cooperation procedures have been used sparingly, and usually in relatively uncontentious policy areas, like divorce law or patents. Using such a mechanism to forge ahead in a policy area as contentious and potentially transformative as joint debt was basically unprecedented, and there was some suggestion at the time that this might act as a proof of concept for other member states frustrated with the sluggish pace of integration in other policy areas under EU competence. And well, that seems to be exactly what's happened. About a month later, in January, Germany hosted a meeting of a new grouping that's since been nicknamed the E6, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland and Spain, whereafter the 6 countries announced their intention to accelerate integration on economic issues. Perhaps most notably, the group announced their intention to press on with the so-called Capital Markets Union, an oft-discussed but never realised plan that would basically make it easier for savings and investments to flow across the EU, with the aim of giving European startups better access to European funding, which is one of the big reasons that so many of them migrate to the US at the moment, and getting European savers better returns on their, savings. The E6 didn't explicitly mention the enhanced cooperation procedure, but the subtext was pretty clear. The readout after the meeting, for instance, stated that key projects that are currently being negotiated at EU level need to be accelerated. And a day earlier, the German finance minister did an interview with Welt TV, where he announced now is the time for a two-speed Europe. The E6 will need at least 3 other member states to actually use the enhanced cooperation procedure, But this shouldn't be too difficult, and a number of other European countries, including Sweden, Denmark, and Austria, have already signalled their interest in participating in the Capital Markets Union. Something similar is also happening when it comes to security policy. The E6 have announced their intention to deepen cooperation on defence procurement, and on literally the same day, the EU's Defence Commissioner, Andrius Kubilius, proposed the creation of an EU Security Council, modelled on the UN Security Council, with Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Poland, sometimes known as the E5, as its permanent members. Kubilius chose these countries because they, along with the UK, have been primarily responsible for organising European support for Ukraine, and have already formed a sort of accidental grouping in this mould. Anyway, if these initiatives take off, and this trend continues, we really could quite quickly end up with a multi-speed Europe of many concentric circles, as different subsets of member states forge ahead with integration in those areas that they're most enthusiastic about. Now, the purists among you might resist this staggered approach to integration. It risks adding yet more complexity to the EU's already complicated governance structure. It might irk member states who feel excluded. It could even reduce pressure on more obstructionist members to join in, ultimately undermining the European vision of an ever closer union. But we would say two things here. First, there's a growing consensus that in these turbulent times, unanimity is too high a bar, and it prevents the EU from acting with the required geopolitical agility. And second, this is sort of how the EU has always worked. The EU already had various opt-outs and ongoing enhanced cooperation procedures, and even a mishmash of overlapping intergovernmental treaties. Historically, staggered integration has actually helped the EU achieve its most ambitious projects, like Schengen or the Euro, and this should give us some cause for optimism going forwards. Clearly, the current state of the world is plagued by uncertainty and risk. And just while you've been watching this video, your personal information may have been sold or published online without you even knowing about it. And you might just think, well, what's the harm in a few spam calls? But unfortunately, it's not that simple. It might be scary, but scams and identity theft both start with your personal data being exposed online. So that's why we turn to Incogni. Incogni expertly tracks down and removes your data from multiple sites, so that your personal information can't be bought or sold by bad actors online. No longer will your data pop up on online directories, people's search sites, or commercial databases for everyone to see and abuse. They work on your behalf to request your personal data removal, and even conduct repeated removal requests so that you can remain in control. You can even send Incogni sites that expose your data, and they'll send removal requests on your behalf, or assist in you opting out on your own with their custom removals feature. And it's even impacting parts of your life that you never thought about. For example, your health insurance could actually raise your rates just based on your online activity, particularly the data that you enter into health apps. Insurance companies can easily buy that data and decide for themselves just how healthy you are, without you even getting a say. From your phone number to your political affiliation, Incogni can help you find it all and remove it from the internet for good, keeping you protected from the threats you might not even be aware of. Because if they can't find you, they can't harm you. There's no better time to start protecting yourself. So create an account with our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using code TLDRnews at checkout, you can get an exclusive 60% off their annual Incogni plan. And there's absolutely no risk either with their 30-day money-back guarantee.